Some people think that there's a conspiracy, that somehow someone gives these media marching orders to do this. I don't. Here's what I think is actually happening. I think that the mass media desperately want to be relevant. The mass media, the people in the mass media, don't understand the internet. They don't understand the new media environment. It is true, and this is why I mentioned polls at the beginning. It is true that the scientifically conducted polls, the Gallup polls, the polls conducted by the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, all the major news organizations sponsor polls, that those polls show Ron Paul support at about 3%. He's ahead of Duncan, what's his last name? I want to say Duncan Hines, but I don't think that's his last name. Hey, sorry, Duncan. But Ron Paul is ahead of Duncan. He's ahead of Tancredo. But I mean, he's not doing very well in the national scientifically conducted polls. So I think it's because of that that the people in the mass media, when they get a result that goes contrary to what they think is the truth, they don't want to be embarrassed. So that's why I want to leave a little bit of time. We just have about 5 minutes for some questions. But I think a far better approach, if it's okay with you, would be for the mass media to say, we'll tape you for the questions, but if on the other hand you prefer not to be on camera, there is a disparity between what the national scientifically conducted polls are reporting and what is happening over and over again. And you know, there are things that are happening that the mass media are probably even dimly aware of. If you look at Technorati, if you look at Dig, these are two sites that each in their own ways keep track of what's going on the web. If you look at just about anything that keeps track of what's happening on the web, stories about Ron Paul are consistently #1 in terms of the number of readings that they get, the number of hits. So are there just a few Ron Paul supporters sitting somewhere in a room, they have no life and they're just constantly hitting these stories? Maybe, but I doubt it. And maybe a healthier approach for our democracy would be for the media to look into this discrepancy. Because maybe what's going on is what happened back in 1936. Or maybe what's going on, as I'm sure you've all heard of, and we're going to talk about this later on this term as well, in the election of 1948, that famous newspaper which says Dewey wins. And you know, there's a great picture of Truman holding it up the next day with a big smile on his face because Truman won. So why did the newspaper print the wrong result? Because at the time they went to press, their polls, which were conducted primarily in eastern states, made that newspaper believe that Dewey was going to win. But, you know, the polls turned out to be wrong. Any questions about this? Yes?
Are there any news stations that have reported on the misreporting and have tried to unveil it? And if so, would they even air it?
That's a very good question. And just in case you didn't hear that, the question was, are there any stations that have reported on the misreporting? And the answer is, as far as I know, no. And I think it would be a great story. I think, what'd you say?
Why wouldn't they report on it?
I think because we're talking about the same mass media that do this. And I think that the other mass media, say like MSNBC, CNN, they're very close perhaps towards doing this also. They haven't done it, but I think that all the mass media are pretty much the same in their misunderstanding of what's happening on the internet. And I think that you know, they don't want to get into a story where somehow they themselves might be caught up. But it's an excellent question because I predict that pretty soon we will see reports about this if it continues. And one other thing your question makes me want to mention, which is the most recent transgressions have happened at Fox News, not ABC. So it's possible that ABC maybe has woken up to what's going on there.
Why
Yes.
Ron Paul? Why don't they, just because he doesn't support the war, why is everyone ganging up on him?
The question is, why Ron Paul? Well, I think the reason is because of the discrepancy of how Ron Paul is doing in the national scientifically conducted polls and how he does in these call-in polls, where again, the people who call in are not randomly selected. So this makes people think, well, maybe somehow some kind of, shenanigans are going on behind the scenes. But it's also true, I think, and you're right, that Ron Paul, I think, is frightening to the establishment. Because let's just look at the war. We went to war without a declaration of war. There are other things that were wrong with why we went to war, but basically, what did the media do when we went to war in Iraq? The answer is they supported the war, right? I think the media failed their responsibility then as well. They should have been on the story of whether there were weapons of mass destruction. Ron Paul makes that point, and so I think he makes people feel uncomfortable. Yes?
And obviously sees what's going on. Have they released any comments in regards to what Fox and ABC as well as Washington Post have been doing and reporting?
Ron Paul's campaign officially has not, but there are a huge number of Ron Paul websites and groups. For example, the Ron Paul New York Meetup Group, Ron Paul for President 2008. So most of his websites constantly publish stories about this. But Ron Paul's campaign in itself, as far as I know, has not released an official statement about this one way or another. I think they're trying to stay sort of above the fray. You have to be, by the way, careful when you attack the media. I mean, it's easy for me to attack the media because I'm a professor. My profession doesn't depend on the media coverage that I get. So I don't care. Don't cover me. Don't talk about me. Who cares? But if you're, running for president, it's a very touchy thing to lash out at the very media that you need to get your story out there. So that might be why Ron Paul's official campaign hasn't said anything. I wish they would, though. Yeah.
I mean, while you're talking about conspiracy, do you think there's any connection between the media avoiding Ron Paul and the fact that he's supported in large part by 9/11 Truth?
The question is there any connection between the media's misreporting Ron Paul and the fact that Ron Paul is supported, I don't know if you use this word, but I will, nutcases who think that there was some kind of deliberate bringing down of the towers on September 11th. No, I don't think there's any connection whatsoever, because first of all, that's not Ron Paul's position, and second of all, I don't know anyone other than those conspiracy theorists who are saying that theory. But again, I would be the first to say I can't get into these people's heads. And I think, ABC in particular really is astonishing because it goes across such a wide stretch of ABC media, their webpage, their radio, their television. So I don't know what their problem is, but if you're asking me, do I think it's because of what you suggested? No, I don't. Yes.
Which media or which medium of news do you think is most reliable? Do you think maybe the internet would be better than television, maybe newspapers would be better than radio, or?
I think we're living right now in a very exciting time. And the question is, which kind of medium do I think is more reliable for reporting the news? I think we're living in a time of transition. I think even just 5 years ago, television, newspapers, and radio were pretty much the only games in town that people paid any attention to. And even 4 years ago, Howard Dean tried to mount a campaign on the internet and obviously failed. However, I think with every day that goes by, YouTube, blogging, podcasting, these new media are becoming more and more important. And I think what we're seeing with the misreporting of Ron Paul by the mainstream media, if you take out the personality, if you take out even Ron Paul's positions, we're seeing a conflict between old media who are fossilized, becoming less relevant. Network television is losing viewers in the millions. Back in the 1970s, you would have an average audience on any night of network news of over 50 million. Now they're lucky if they draw 15 million. So yeah, I think that the internet is the way to go for the future of reporting. Listen, it looks like we're just about out of time. I want to thank you very much.